Well, hello, my name is Jeff Cordwell and I provide ACCA APM courses digitally via my website, jeffcordwell.com, and also via fmelearnonline.com, the main platform. And I thought today I'd share with you a question I got from one of my revision students. And what this lady was asking is, how do I read a question? Because what she was saying is that she got lost in the question a little bit, didn't really quite grasp the APM scenario that was being presented, that she was often having to read things twice, things took a bit too long, and therefore ran out of time to answer the question properly. And I completely understand that. It's a real problem, this, with APM, because the scenarios are complicated and quite long, and therefore it is easy to get lost and it's easy to take too much time. So I thought what I'd do is just share 3 ideas, if you like, of how to read a question properly so you use your time as well as you possibly can. Now, obviously, the first thing I think everyone will say to you is that what you must do is read the requirement first, because that provides a context for reading the rest of it. But it's also true to say that potentially you can use the requirement just to itemize 1 or 2 things that you think might be likely to come up in the scenario. So if I was asking you to consider the move between incremental budgeting to, say, zero basing, you might think to yourself, well, it's quite common that in incremental budgeting it's abused and that 5% is added to everything. And you might make a note of that in your mind or even on a piece of paper to say, there is this potential problem with incremental budgeting. Or you might jot down, use it or lose it. There are reservations to that approach, because you must be careful, I think, that what you do write down ultimately becomes relevant to the scenario and relevant to the individual business. But it's useful as a starting framework. Then, of course, what you've got to do is read the main body of the question. And when I read things, I do have 2 levels of reading. Sometimes what I do is I just read very superficially, if you like, when I'm reading a newspaper or when I'm reading, maybe even sometimes reading a book, and I sometimes then look back at the page and think, I haven't really engaged with that. And that certainly is a mistake. So what I would suggest you do is fully engage, slow down a little bit and read sentence by sentence. Because what you're trying to do with the sentence by sentence approach is decide whether the information that's been given is just background information that you sort of don't really need, but it's there, or whether it's something specific that the examiner's put into the question that you then must deal with. So in the incremental budgeting to zero basing, for example, it is possible the examiner will mention that a blanket 5%, as I said before, a blanket 5% has been added to every actual cost from last year to produce the new incremental budget. Why has he done that? Why has he mentioned something so specific? Is because it's in the answer. And what you've got to do is recognize that as you read it. So don't read things in the whole, read things sentence by sentence. Decide whether it's a background point or whether it's a specific point. And if it's a specific point, it must be in your answer and you must then comment on it. That's not to say you must just write it out again. You've got to add value. You've got to add an interpretation. So if I read in the question, all the actual costs from last year are added 5% and that produced the new budget, you've got to say this is probably unrealistic. Not all costs will justify a 5% increase. Some will justify less than that and some will justify more than that, depending on the changes in the organisation, the rate of inflation, all these sorts of things that you could provide a bit of an added value point to. So there's my basic ideas, I think, is that what you're trying to say is read the requirement first and do an outline. Then don't read it holistically, read it sentence by sentence and ask yourself, is this individual sentence background information or is it a specific? And as you're reading, build a plan. Don't wait to the end of the entire appendix or the entire exhibit before you say, okay, what's this telling me? Read it section by section, sentence by sentence even, Yeah, and therefore what I'm trying to get you to do, I suppose, is read it well and read it once. Yeah, and that produces a plan in the time that you've got, because you haven't got a lot of time to plan in APM. It's a very time pressured exam, isn't it? Okay, so I hope that's useful. Read it well, read it once.